Hi friends, in this video we're going to talk about 21 phrases you can use to improve your writing on the Duolingo English test. But quickly before we start that, if you're new to this channel, hi, I'm teacher Luke from DETready.com. Visit our website because we have lots of tools and information to help you prepare for this Duolingo English test. Okay, so the first category of phrases we're going to study today is all to do with opinions. Now, on the Duolingo English test, you may be required to give your opinion about a topic on the writing question. So it's important you know how to talk about your opinion clearly and academically. Most students would just say, in my opinion, which is totally fine, but here are some other phrases you can use which are probably more advanced. So one easy phrase you can use is, from my point of view, or in my view. You could also say, I'm inclined to believe that, or my impression is that. Another good one is, in my perspective. Now, these are all really useful ways to share your opinion on the Duolingo English test, and in my point of view, they are better than using in my opinion. Especially if you're sharing your opinion more than once, you don't want to repeat yourself. So practice using these ones instead. Let me show you some full examples. From my point of view, governments and local authorities should ban fast food companies from advertising to young people. Another good way to give your opinion is to talk about the opposite opinion first and then use a word like however to share your opinion. Something like this. Some people argue that, however, in my perspective. In a full example, some people argue that children should be allowed to eat whatever they want. However, I'm inclined to believe that children's diets need to be closely supervised. Okay, now let's talk about how you can develop or extend your ideas on this test. It's important on this writing question not just to give your opinion and then move on. Instead, you do want to develop and extend your idea. And a good way to do this is to mention a similar point that's similar to your opinion. So what are some phrases you can use to do that? Let's take a look here. In addition, or additionally, moreover, adding to my previous point. Another good one is not only, but also. As I mentioned on the exam, you want to extend your answers as much as possible because it shows the examiners that you're able to talk about all of your opinions well in English. And these phrases are a great way to extend your opinions. And here are some example ideas of how to use them. In addition, children who eat a lot of fast food are more at risk from serious health issues. Another example, not only is fast food unhealthy for children, but it can also cause serious health issues. Not only, but also is a great way to extend your ideas because in the not only section of the sentence, you mention your previous idea, and then after, but also, you mention your new idea. On top of that, it adds a lot of emphasis to your writing, which is also a good thing to do. Another great idea to extend your answers is by adding examples. And as a teacher myself, when I see my students give examples, I think that's fantastic. However, I see a lot of the phrase, for example. Of course, that phrase is great to use once, maybe twice, but if you're given lots of examples in your writing, then you want to use different phrases. So instead of for example, you can use for instance, to give a clear example, or a clear example of this is. You could also use to illustrate. These phrases are great to use instead of for example. Let's look at some full sentences and then I'll talk a bit more about them. A clear example of this is heart disease, since children who eat a lot of fast food are more prone to heart-related health issues later in life. To illustrate, a recent study found that children who eat fast food on a daily basis are 15% more likely to have heart-related issues when they become adults. To illustrate is normally followed by a statistic or a number. If you noticed in my example, I said 15%. That refers to the statistic I'm talking about. You might also want to know that you don't have to use accurate statistics in your exam. You can just make them up like I did here. I didn't know that, I just wrote it off the top of my head. It's probably not true. But that's fine. This test is a test of your English knowledge, not your ability to memorize facts and figures. Next up, we have talking about a condition. A condition basically means if something happens first, then something else can happen second. Conditions mostly start with the word if, so if you know the if grammatical structures, you know how to use a conditional sentence. But not all conditions start with the word if. You can use other phrases as well. After if, probably the most common is provided that. You can also use as long as, and the negative condition is unless. These phrases work in exactly the same way as if sentences. They signal that something should happen before something else happens next. Let me show you what I mean. Provided that children eat a balanced diet, having 1 or 2 fast food meals per week should not cause any health issues. Unless governments ban fast food companies advertising to children, health issues among the young will continue to increase. And of course, we should look at phrases for ending your answer to conclusion. In this exam, I sometimes see students write "in a nutshell" or "finally," and these are not acceptable for a conclusion in an academic essay. They are too informal. The best ones to use for an academic essay are these ones here. I would always play it safe and just use one of these 3 phrases to conclude your essay. No one is going to disagree with these phrases. Okay, now you need to practice your writing, and this is the video here you need for that. I'll see you there. Bye. Hi friends, in this video we're going to talk about 21 phrases you can use to immediately improve your speaking on the Duolingo English test. Now these phrases are helpful because they'll help you sound a lot more natural, make your answers sound more logical, and help you speak for longer. And we will start in just 1 second, but if you're new here, hi, I'm teacher Luke from DETready.com. Visit our website to find useful tools and information to help you prepare for the Duolingo English test. Okay then, well let's get started with today's lesson. I'm going to teach you these phrases by going through an answer for one of the speaking questions on the Practice Duolingo English test, and this is the question we'll look at today. Discuss public assistance offered to low-income families in your country. What kind of assistance is offered? Who can benefit? What are some of the positive and negative results of these programs? So this is the question we're going to answer. When you get a question like this on the Duolingo English test, it's good to begin your talk by using an introductory phrase. Basically, a phrase that will introduce the topic. These are a great way to begin your talk because they make you sound a lot more logical and they give you a couple more seconds to think about your ideas. Let me show you some of these introductory phrases. You can use phrases like this. Today, I'd like to talk about. In this talk, I'm going to describe, explain. I would like to talk about. I'm going to tell you about. All of these types of phrases are called introductory phrases and they're great for introducing the topic. So here's an example in full. Today, I'd like to talk about the different types of housing assistance low-income families get in my country. Another example. In this talk, I'm going to describe the different types of housing assistance low-income families get in my country. So as you can see, using an introductory phrase like this can help you sound a lot more logical and it's a great way to begin your answers. Now let's take a look back at the question we're answering today. You might notice that there are actually 3 different questions Duolingo asks you. This is very common on the read then speak question type on the test. And I strongly recommend that you answer each of these questions because it'll give you more things to talk about and help you speak for longer. But it is important how you transition from question to question. There are different phrases you can use to move from first to second to third. So let me show you some of those phrases here. For example, in regard to the first question, turning to the second question, or as for the final question. So you can use these 3 phrases to move from the first, second, and third questions, and I think they're a great way to transition. It also means that you don't have to link the ideas together to go from question to question. You can kind of begin a new idea by using one of these phrases. On top of that, if you want to go back to a question, if you have time or you have new ideas, you can use a phrase like this. Returning to the first question, or returning to the second question. Now let me show you a full example. In regard to the first question, low-income families are entitled to several types of housing assistance, but the most common, I believe, is rental assistance, where families can receive a grant to help pay their rent. As for the final question, I strongly believe that support for low-income families is essential, especially for families with children. Returning to the second question, I would like to add that low-income families are not the only ones who can receive government support, but also the elderly and people with disabilities can receive similar assistance. These types of transitional phrases from question to question are a great way to make your answers sound a lot more logical, and it makes it easier for you to move to another question. Personally, I recommend you use these when you do the speaking question on the Duolingo test. Also, on the Duolingo speaking questions, you are required to give your opinion from time to time, and there are lots of different phrases you can use to give your opinion. Of course, the most common one is, in my opinion, but you don't want to use that one all the time. You can use some different ones. So let's look at some different ways to express your opinions now. You could say something like, I'm inclined to believe that. From my point of view, or from my perspective. My impression is that, as far as I'm concerned, the way I see it. So these are 5 different phrases you can use instead of in my opinion, and they're probably better. You'll probably get a higher score if you use one of these phrases on any English exam. Of course, in my opinion is not wrong, you just don't want to use it all the time. Now I'll show you a few quick examples on how you can use these phrases in your answers. So here's a full example. I'm inclined to believe that housing assistance is essential for many low-income families, especially families with young children. Another example, as far as I'm concerned, housing assistance is vital for many struggling families. And a third example, the way I see it, housing assistance is an important benefit for families who are struggling economically. Being able to give your opinion effectively on the Duolingo test is really important, and these phrases can help you a lot. Now next up, after you've given your opinion, you want to back it up with some examples. And nearly all the students I teach use the same phrase to show that they're going to give an example. Of course, they say, for example. But there are lots of different ones you can use. And the more variety of phrases you use in your answer will lead to a better score. So let me show you some different phrases you can use to give examples here. For instance, a great example of this is, let me share an example. An instance from my life that springs to mind is. Giving examples like this is a great way to develop your answer, and that's really important too. And like I said earlier, it's a good idea not to use the same phrase over and over again, so don't just use the phrase, for example, many times, instead use these. Let's see how they can be used in a full sentence. For instance, families who are eligible for housing assistance can receive monthly grants to help pay for their rent, as well as food stamps to cover their cost of groceries. And if you want to give a personal example, an example from your experience, you could say something like this. An instance from my life that springs to mind is when my best friend's mother and father both lost their jobs and they had to rely on government benefits for a short time to afford their groceries and pay their energy bills. It's very important to remember that when you do the speaking question on the Duolingo test, that you have to develop your ideas. That means go beyond just giving your opinion, but giving a reason or an example why. Using phrases like the ones I just showed you are a great way to give examples. Okay, now we've spoken a lot about this question, it's time to conclude our answer. Many of my students use phrases like in conclusion or to sum up to conclude their answer, which is totally fine, but as always, I want to show you more variety of different phrases you can use. So here are some more phrases you can use to conclude your answer. You can say something like, to wrap this talk up. To summarize my opinion quickly. So that's why. To make a long story short. I don't recommend you use these phrases for writing. They are a bit informal for that, but they are totally fine for any type of speaking. By nature, speaking is a lot more informal, so phrases like this are totally fine. Let's see some examples of them. To wrap up this talk, although some people argue that my government are too generous with the assistance they offer to low-income families, I believe it's essential that they continue offering this type of support. Okay, that's it. Those were 21 phrases you can use. Now I recommend you watch this speaking video next. It will help you to organize your answer. Okay, see you there.